Hi, I'm Hannah Pinkerton from Rompiendo las Barreras. Today we're going to talk about proper nouns and translating them from English to Spanish. So imagine you are having a conversation in Spanish and you want to reference a particular person, place, or thing. So those are considered proper nouns, and the general rule is that we don't translate those to Spanish. So that's a great rule, but there are a couple of exceptions on when we may want to break that. So one exception is if you are talking about a historical person, sometimes it is appropriate to translate that person's name. For example, when we in the United States talk about Christopher Columbus, that's how we refer to him, but his actual name, since he is Spanish from Spain, his actual name is Cristóbal Colón. So you'll see that we translated that Spanish name to an English one, and that's how we think of him. Likewise, when we're talking about specific places like cities, states, or countries, we often do translate those names into Spanish. So for example, what we call Morocco as the country here in the US, when we're speaking about that in Spanish, it is translated as Marruecos. Now, there are other places, for example, Spain becomes España, France becomes Francia, and so on. There are other places that follow that same rule, and there are some places that just don't have an equivalent, especially places in the United States. For example, like Seattle, Washington, D.C., certain states, they don't really have an equivalent, so we just kind of pronounce the sounds of the same word in English the way that we would pronounce those letters in Spanish. So it'll sound just a little bit different, but if you were looking at it written, it would be exactly the same. And finally, one thing I wanted to point out is that if you are translating, if it is appropriate to translate, for example, a place to the Spanish language when you're having a conversation about that topic in Spanish, then what I would recommend you do is continue your conversation in Spanish normally, and then when it's time to insert that proper noun, then I would insert it in its normal language, so English or whatever that may be. And then if it's a written document, put in parentheses immediately following that what the translation would be in Spanish. And if it's a conversation, just repeat it but in Spanish afterwards. And so that way you've referenced it in both ways. So if the person you're speaking with in Spanish isn't really sure what that proper noun is, they can go and look up the original on Google, either from a document that you've written with them, an email, something like that, or if you're having a conversation, they can look up the original name. They might have a little trouble finding the Spanish name if that's not how it's referred to here in the US or wherever that name originated. So an example of this is, say you went on a trip to the Grand Canyon and you want to talk to a friend about it in Spanish. So you're talking about the trip, blah, 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 and then you want to tell them where you went. So to reference the Grand Canyon, what I would do is continue your conversation in Spanish, then say, I went, blah, 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 to the Grand Canyon. So Grand Canyon, I would put it just like that in English. And then in parentheses right after that, or if it's a conversation, I would just say El Gran Cañón. So that would be the literal translation of the Grand Canyon. And if they're not familiar with that concept, then they have the original in English so they can go and look up and research. But when you explain it in that way, especially in this particular instance, the Grand Canyon name actually describes what the place is. So that'll help give them a little bit of context if they're not familiar with that landmark. So it's not a really hard and fast set of rules. You can see that there's kind of some gray areas with translation of proper nouns. But if you have any questions on this topic, please feel free to send me an email. I've placed my email address at the bottom of this video, and I'll also put in a link to my website. So if you'd like to learn some more Spanish, feel free to check that out and send me an email. Thanks for watching.